Hi class, let's start the chapter. Okay, this is chapter 11. In this chapter, what we will be talking about imperfect competition. We spoke about the perfect competition, and now we're talking about the imperfect competition, which is chapter 11. So in this chapter, the objective is to explain the importance and effects of a product, differentiation, including the advertisement. We will differentiate between the two types of imperfect competition, explain why monopolistically competitive firms tend to have an excess capacities and unlikely to earn a long run economic profit. We're also going to describe the main characteristic of oligopoly market, very important, and explain why a large firms are often tempted to collide a firm and form a cartel, and explain the price leadership and why oligopolistic firms are reluctant to change the price very often. So what's an imperfect competition? It is a market structure in which the producers are identifiable and have some control over the prices, like a monopoly, but a little bit more firms, and they are identifiable. And in the imperfect competition, there is two forms of this kind of imperfect competition. One is a monopolistic competition, and we spoke about them earlier chapters, and oligopoly. Now, the in the imperfect competition, there is what you call a product differentiation, which is attempt to distinguish a firm's products from its competitors. There is also what we see is a firm often compete on a base other than prices. Could be advertisement, could be product perfection, better usage, and they always have a logos, symbols, brand, locations, service, and product development, as we see in the companies who provide gas for example, in Canada. And often they use an extensive advertising, like we see Coke versus Pepsi, for example, or Nike versus Adidas. In the advertising, the reason people see there is a benefit from these companies doing advertising, and it is, see, when we said they are trying to differentiate, often involve through the advertising. So what's the benefit of advertising? Well, they say it provide the consumer with the vital information, like you, for example, SO's amount of ethanol, how much they use gas and all these, versus the Mohawk, how much ethanol, how much is good for the environment, what kind of things that they can use. They keep advertising these, saying how it's good for the car, how it's bad for the car, something like that. And so they provide a consumer with the vital information, enhance the competition between firms in general. Well, so it lowers the prices of the product when there is a more competition, and on the other hand, is finances, magazines and television and ads, shows, and other also. So, like you would see, probably ESSO sponsor hockey team like Maple Leafs, and Mohawk will probably sponsor, I don't know, Jets, probably. On the other side, what they're seeing, they're trying to criticize the fact what the advertisement is, they say mostly not informative and wasteful. It's just showing ads, how strong you get when you drink a Coke or a Pepsi, and why you should be, it is just a wasteful of not informative. Encourage the concentration within the industries. So there's, you know, um, keep them in a, for example, in a soft drink industries instead of thinking of juices and milk and other things. And also raise, says the prices to determine of the consumers. Also, they have a tendency because they, more advertisement, more costing. Is that cause, more expensive products? So there is, we said there is types of imperfect competition, and we talked about monopolistic competition and oligopoly. In the monopolistic competition, a market in which many firms sell a differentiated product and have some control over the prices. But in the oligopoly, is a market dominated by a few large firms. And the way you do it is probably through, because they are very similar, you do it through probably a calculation in which is we will see it later on. So the both have a few firms, but in the case of monopolies, they have a more firms, oligopolies, a few large firms. Now, how you differentiate is by concentration ratio. The percentage of an industry's total sales that is controlled by a large, just a few firms. So if you have lots, you take all the total sales, what percentage of it is sold by the largest few firms? Then you can see whether it's a monopoly or a oligopoly. And there is something called the four-firm concentration ratio, which is the percentage of sales revenue by the first or the four largest firms industries. If is less than 40% their sales revenue, then it's being monopolistic competition. And if it's these sales of the fourth largest companies is higher than 40% of total sales, total revenue, then it is an oligopoly. We have an oligopoly. So this is how they differentiate. So the four firms concentration ratios in the motor vehicle, you've seen that it's changed from 82%, 87 becomes 100. For example, in tires, it used to be 86.2, now 99.3, sold by the top four of them. You might have a different names for them. Don't get confused. They might have, like for example, Procter and Gamble. They do have a oligopoly over lots of product, but they come up with a different name. They put it in the front, like you have in the detergent. There's so many kind, but if you look at the bottom, saying produced by Procter and Gamble, for example, you have the coffee and the tea. In 1990, was 76% was sold by the top four. Now they're 97%. So there is a tendency to move in from monopolistic competition to oligopoly in these products, these industries. Now, how do we know, how we do this calculation? Basically, is a straightforward, is the first we pick up the first four here, okay? Pick up the first four, we add them together, and we divide them on the total, and we find the percentage. So it's done like this. The fourth largest companies, which is 22, plus 17 here, plus 12, and plus 15. So the fourth largest is company A, then company C, and company D, and company F. You add them together, divide by the total 92, and whatever is the percentage, if it's higher than 40%, we said is oligopoly. If it's less, then it's monopoly. So in this case, because it's a higher than 40%, it is oligopoly. Now, in the monopolistic competition, the characteristic of it is many small firms that acting independent. So we said perfect competition, imperfect competition. With an imperfect competition, the list, it comes in monopolistic, oligopoly, and the last one on that other side is monopoly. So the monopolistic competition has a many small firms acting independently. There is some kind of a freedom of entries. Products are a little bit differentiated, and each firm has some control over price. Not 100%, but some control over their price because the product is a little bit differentiated. In general, the elasticity of demand will depend on the number of rival firms and the degree of product differentiation. And the reason, if there is lots of rival firms, so the consumer have a choice between selecting different firms to get their service or product. And if there is a differentiation, consumer can differentiate if you increase something price of some product compared to other, and they can shift to something according to the differentiation. So there is a price elasticities is depend on the number of arrival or competition firms and the degree of product differentiation. The more differentiation, the more elasticity is there. The more rivals firms, the more elasticity there. In monopolistic competition, there are many rival firms. There is not a lot of differentiation. Okay, so if you create more differentiation, then will cause elasticity. But in the monopolistic, there is not much differentiation, as we said earlier, but there is lots of competition. So this leads to a lot of choice for consumers, an elastic demand curve. So you in the gas stations, for example, if you have one more, because there is not much differentiation between their products, what will happen? Increase of price, they move to the another one. And there is a rival, so you go on a one street, you find 6 companies provide or 10 companies provide gas to them. So this is a kind of a monopolistic competition between them. So the demand is elastic and changes as the price changes. Now, in the monopolistic competition, which is we said it's a closest part of imperfect market to perfect market. It is, we may have an economic profit in a short term because it's a close, but we said, you remember, we said in the perfect competition, in a long term, there is no profit. In a short term, there might be a profit. It's the same thing. May have an economic profit in a short term. And to maximize its profit, where the marginal cost, which is this one, is meet the marginal revenue. And we said in the monopoly, they don't go with the demand, they use the marginal revenue. So it takes like a part of the perfect competition, it takes part of the monopoly, and it comes up with its own characteristics of monopolistic competition. And it's basically, in the monopoly, how you set the product and the price is actually where you intersect the marginal cost with the marginal revenue. You go down, and this is the quantity you provide, and you go up to the demand, to set up the price, and this is the profit area. That's in the perfect monopoly also, we do this. So maximizing the profit, producing where is marginal cost and marginal revenue intersect. At this point, if the price higher than cost, the economic profit, well, obviously, total quantity multiplied by the difference of this. So this area will be the profit. In the long run, because it is, we said, it's very close to perfect competition, if has a positive profit and new firms start entering, and we said in the perfect competition, more profit, more suppliers comes in. But then once the more entries comes in, we notice that more consumer choice moves the firm demand left and flatten. So as the suppliers start entering, then we notice that two things is happening. One is demand shift in, but also more important, the demand become more flatter, means more elastic because there is more options. We will have that keep moving until when it reaches to the perfect competition, it gets more flattened. So we will have only normal profit in a long run. So the normal profit, it's happening at the P2. So that's the typical firms where, the price hit the demand, the average cost equal with the demand. So we notice there is a shift, not only shift in, we notice also there is a flat happening, flatten. So just to understand, assume that the representative firm a monopolistic competition is experiencing is a loss. What's a series of what will happen if there is a loss happen? Now, when it start loss, some company cannot sustain this loss, so they will exit. In the same time, the demand curve shift to the right for all remaining firms. So some of them will exit, and in the same time, the demand curve starts shifting because we said it would be shifting in and then start shifting to the right again. And this will continue step one and step two until have a normal profit. If there's lots of, if there is a lots of, instead of loss, there's a profit, it will be different. It's some firms start entering and more entering, and the demand curve start shifting to the left and remain on all remaining firms, and then keeps continuing until it's balancing. There is something called a blocking entries. In the blocking entries, basically, if entries of the competitor can be blocked, positive economic profit can be maintained in the long run. So if I'm blocking people from entering, then I can generate more, increasing the price and generate more money and more profit. But that's not get to do with the pricing and quantity. That get to do with the things like a professional association, like the doctor association, the lawyer association in North America. It's difficult to enter. The chartered accountant, you cannot be coming from different countries without writing these tests to enter, and these tests are difficult to write. So these are a blocking. You can blocking entry. So professional association, the perception that only members are competent. The government policies like a licensing, you cannot enter without a license, so the companies can operate who has the license, the others cannot. And the other one is in the business, franchising. which is we know how the franchising works. In the franchising, franchise can create a nationwide business with a competitive advantage. How? Is by large scale advertising. So when you see a McDonald's advertising, is actually McDonald's is doing advertising for the whole the franchises of McDonald's. And so it's a large scale advertising. A small restaurant cannot do that. So there is more spending on these advertisements. And then they have also what you call a bulk purchasing. So usually, McDonald's, Burger King, Tim Hortons, they purchase the goods and resell it to the franchisees. And they buy big bulk, so it's cheaper for them, and they sell it to the franchisees. So its cost for them is lower for McDonald's and for the resellers of McDonald's. And there is a branding. They always make sure that there is a branding attached to their product so people recognize their branding and differentiate between them. But in return, each member firms has to pay a fees to be part of these franchisees. So we know that, and they have an exclusive kind of a geography territories. If only other large-scale franchisee can compete, this firm can enter. Like only who compete with the Burger King somehow is McDonald's and KFC probably, because they are smaller and bigger, very close to each other. McDonald's and Burger King, Pepsi, McDonald's and Burger King is a very clear competition between them. Now, the positive side, as they think, for a monopolistic competition is produced at the lower output. It produces a lower output than perfect competitive firms. So they don't consume a lot, but they don't really achieve the productivity efficiencies. They are not efficient because there is no competition, so they don't need to lower the price very low. So in a long run equilibrium, price does not equal with the minimum total cost as in the perfect competition. The charges are higher prices than the perfect competitive. We know that because they don't need to compete with the many companies. They compete with the one or two, so they can keep the price high, and eventually they don't or they does not achieve allocative efficiencies. Price exceed the marginal cost. When the price exceeds the marginal cost, they don't need to be efficient to perform. So if the firm is monopolistic competitive, what would be the output it produce? So basically it produce as we saw it in the monopoly, is where marginal revenue, this one, we said it doesn't, they don't care about the demand, they go with marginal revenue equal with the marginal cost, and then they determine the quantity, and then they go up and they determine the price. So how much is the difference is actually, if they were perfect competition, it would be the Q4. We know if it would be the Q4, what is the marginal revenue equal with the average cost. But here is at this quantity, the difference Q4 minus Q2. Now we have one step toward monopoly, which is oligopoly. The last one is monopoly. This before it is oligopoly. So in the oligopoly is dominated by a few large firms. Excuse me. So in the oligopoly, it's dominated by a few large firms. Entry by a new firm is difficult, if it's not very difficult. Non-price competition between firms is widely practiced. Each firm has a significant control over its price, and a mutual interdependence exists between these firms. So they don't compete on the price. They compete over, each firm has a significant, because they have a control over the price. They compete between them is always like, so that within the oligopoly, there's a competition, but the whole oligopoly is probably, they don't compete with the others on the price. But there is a mutual interdependence because they sign some kind of, or they have some kind of an agreement to cooperate with each other. Now, in oligopolies, products can be either homogeneous, like the steel, or differentiated, like the automobiles, like we see in the cars here, Ford, GMs. These are in the oligopoly. And there is a mutual independence between them. The condition in which a firm action depend in a part on the reaction of the firms. And we will explain in the next slide what we mean here. Now, what's a collision? A collision, it is an agreement among suppliers to set up the price of a product or the quantity will produce. So they can set up a price because they are the producers, or they play with the quantities, reduce the quantity so the price goes up or down. So these are an agreement among them, whether it's written, official, or unofficial. And we said they compete with each other, not over price, but they do have what you call a game theory, which makes it more interesting in oligopoly. It is a method of analyzing firms that highlight mutual interdependence among the firms. Let's see. In the game theory, a situation where each rival chooses the best action for themselves, but giving the anticipated what the others will do. So in the game theory, that's how the oligopolies firms they work together. It says we have an oligopoly made of two companies, Aman's and Omar's. And let's assume Aman's and Omar's, they have some kind of agreement, but they do some kind of a game theory. And Aman's does sit together, sit with themselves, analyzes, I would not cheat because the another is not cheating, the other firm, because, and if we don't, both of us not cheating, each one will sell 125. But here, if they think that the other would not cheat, and they say, well, let's cheat, then 140, they will sell 100, these guys, so they lose 100 and 140 goes to this. Keep in mind, here is the total 150, here is the total will lose, but they're gonna gain 15. If they don't cheat and the other cheat, then what we will have, they becomes 100, like this one, and the other will make, because they're cheating, is 140. But in the both case, if the both cheat together, then what will have in 105 and 105? One of the causing of the war between Iraq and Kuwait is this game theory, is because Saddam Hussein claimed that Kuwait is cheating, selling too much oil, and hence the price of the oil is going down. So he went and invaded Kuwait. So that's one of the reason he said, claimed that that's the reason I invaded, because Kuwait is cheating on the oil supply, which is reducing the price of it. Now let's have a total understanding, assuming two firms running a shoe industries. We're not gonna go through this, neither this. So a cartel is um, just a second. Okay, a cartel is association of sellers acting in unison with each other together. For example, we have the Organization of Petroleum and Exporting Countries. So in the early days, we had what you call monopoly moving to oligopolies, cartel. So in the cartel, we usually have an organization, few working as a one body. For example, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which is OPEC, able to increase the price by restricting, lowering the output of their oil. Cartel works the advantage of their members only if there is a cheating among the participants. So the Iraq and Kuwait was part of the cartel, and they assumed that Kuwait was cheating. So it works if they don't cheat. In the non-collision oligopoly, the rival when the rival firms engage in what amount the price fixing without over collision is that you have a leader, usually the largest or the most efficient firm, set the price of other firms to follow. Like as we see in the cartel, Saudi Arabia set the price because they are the largest producers in OPEC, and the others will follow them through setting the price. But in the cartel, they try to do reductions of quantities or increases. But must be balanced in advantage of the increases with the risk of change. So the issues that what happened between Russia and Saudi Arabia, or recently, they agreed on both lowering the quantity, but then when they had disagreement between each others, and you saw in the video, suddenly Russia decided not to lower their, and then Saudi Arabia decided to increase, and that reduced the prices totally. Some believe that oligopolies are too powerful and they produce inefficiencies. Others take the view that oligopoly are cutting edge of the technology because they make profit, and in the long run, they push the average cost of production down. As what we said, too many they produce a lot, and once they produce a lot, the cost goes down, as we justified it for monopoly case. So in the end, we talked about the importance of different product differentiation, the two types of imperfect competition, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly, and their characteristic. We also spoke about the monopolistic competitive firm have normal profit and excess capacities in the long term, the strategies of collision and leadership and price leadership, and we spoke about the oligopoly. And thank you.